It's 10:20, so it's 4:20 somewhere. So if you got one, spark up. All right, I'm gonna have to apologize for not having a video the last couple days. Got a new roommate, and gotta figure out a time when I can. Wednesdays and Thursdays are her days off, and she got a kid and whatnot, so it's kind of hard to get some quiet time so I can do this. I'm gonna try to figure out something though. Maybe find a way to soundproof my room so I can not have any distractions and be able to get this done. But today, as requested by, let me make sure I get this right. Darius Hahn. It's going to be Noam Chomsky, The Crimes of U.S. Presidents. Based on the comment he shared with me when he requested this, he said it would be nice if an American can share their take on this issue. So I'm going to take a guess, correct me if I'm wrong, that he is not from the U.S. And surprise, surprise, a lot of people outside the U.S., many try to get in, but there's also many who are not fans of our foreign policy. I'm not either. So I am going into this. The crimes of U.S. presidents is, I always say it, all living presidents should be sharing a cell together. Well, let's see what Chomsky got to say.
You said that if the Nuremberg principles were applied, every post-World War II president would be indictable.
That's probably true.
Can we run down them real fast? What did Eisenhower do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala.
That was, I believe, Operation Paperclip, overthrowing the president of Iran and implementing the Shah. That was in 1952. Shah was in power till 79, when the Iranian people finally had enough. And our government has been salty ever since. We gave Saddam Hussein in the 80s chemical weapons to go to war with Iran. However, Iran, based on their ideological government, they came to the conclusion that the only way to defeat Saddam would have been to build a nuclear weapon. And based on their religious principles, they refused to do it, so they just surrendered. And the war came to an end. Hey, Sylvester. And ever since then, we've shot down passenger jets,
by military coup.
So when people try to paint, in particular, our politicians try to paint Iran as a aggressor, you can't point to an instance where Iran did anything to the U.S. prior to 1952, which means the people of Iran did not start it. We did, because we wanted access to their oil fields. Plain and simple. Our foreign policy since the 40s, or since World War II, has always been about either oil, minerals, gold, reference to Afghanistan, poppy, in Southeast Asia too. I've been I always make the connections with people. You can follow our drug epidemics based on where our military is. 50s, 60s, we had a heroin problem. Well, in the 50s and 60s, our military was primarily in Southeast Asia. Lots of opium coming from Southeast Asia. then you hit, and that went into the 70s too, and then late 70s, 80s, early 90s, our military and CIA and all them was spending a lot of time in Central and South America, where we know cocaine comes from. And what did we have for an epidemic then? 2001. We invade Afghanistan. Sure enough, 2002, opium epidemic starts. If you think this is a coincidence, then you are choosing to be blind. I'm not saying you have to hate the country within which you live. I don't. I love the people around me. I love the landscape. However, the politicians, the people who rule over us, are a bunch of fucking war criminals and psychopaths. There's no other way to put it. And as long as we keep playing their games and voting these war criminals and psychopaths in the office, we as a people will never be fully safe from out. People won't want to do us harm from other countries if we're not out dropping bombs on their countries, so that we can, go in there, get some resources, or send some of our jobs to their country so that, their people can, make pennies a day. If you're complaining about our jobs, where'd they go? We overthrew governments, and they went into those countries so that big money interests could save some money. It's all connected. If you just gotta be willing to accept some certain things. Like I said, you don't have to hate your country. Just hate the people that run it. There's a difference. But let's get back to it. We're only 30 seconds in, and I've already gone off on a rant. Here we go.
Asian leading.
Or do that you would indict him for?
Eisenhower overthrew the conservative nationalist government of Iran with a military coup. He overthrew the first and last democratic government in Guatemala by military coup and invasion, leading to years of, in Iran it led to 25 years of brutal dictatorship, finally overthrown in 79. In Guatemala it led to massive atrocities, which are still continuing. That's after almost 50 years. In Indonesia, this wasn't known until recently, but he conducted the major clandestine terror operation of the post-war period up until Cuba and Nicaragua in an effort to break up Indonesia, strip off the outer islands where most of the resources are, and undermine what was then considered as a threat of Indonesian democracy. Indonesia was too free and open. It was allowing a political party of the poor to participate, and they were gaining a lot of ground, so that Eisenhower supported and helped instigate a military rebellion in the outer islands. This is just for starters. These are all indictable offenses.
What about Kennedy?
Kennedy was one of the worst. Kennedy, first of all, invaded South Vietnam. During the Eisenhower administration, they had blocked a political settlement in 1954 and instituted a kind of a Latin American-style terror state, which had killed maybe 60 or 70,000 people by the end of the Eisenhower period, and had instigated a response, a reaction. Kennedy recognized that it couldn't be controlled internally, so he simply invaded. In 1962, about a third of the bombing missions that were carried out by the U.S. Air Force in U.S. planes with South Vietnamese insignia, but U.S. pilot. He authorized napalm. He began the use of chemical weapons to destroy food crops. They began programs which drove millions of people into what amounted to concentration camps. Now that's aggression. In the case of Cuba, it was just a massive campaign of international terrorism. which almost led to the destruction of the world, led to the missile crisis. And we can continue. Again, these are all indictable offenses.
Johnson.
Well, Johnson expanded the war in Indochina to the point where it ended up probably leaving 3 or 4 million people dead. He invaded the Dominican Republic to block what looked like a potential democratic revolution there, supported the Israeli occupation in its early stages. Again, we can go around the world. Take, say, Carter. You know,
I'll get there, but Nixon's next.
Nixon, we don't even have to talk about. We can skip that one, okay? But
Ford.
Well, Ford was only there for a short time, but long enough to endorse the Indonesian invasion of East Timor, which became about as close to genocide as anything in the modern period. They pretended to oppose it, but secretly supported, in fact, not so secretly. The U.S., immediately after the invasion, the U.S. did join the rest of the world in formally condemning it at the Security Council. But Ambassador Moynihan was kind enough to explain to us, in his words, that his instructions were to render the United Nations utterly ineffective in any actions it might take to counter the Indonesian invasion. And he says proudly that he did this with considerable success. His next sentence says, in the next few months, it seems that about 60,000 people were killed. And then he goes off to the next topic. That's the first few months, went on to probably hundreds of thousands. Formally, the U.S. Announced a boycott of weapons, but secretly it increased the supply of weapons, including counterinsurgency equipment, so that the Indonesians could consummate the invasion. That's just a short period in office, but that's indictable. Seriously, in fact, that's a major war crime. Carter increased, as the Indonesian atrocities were increasing. They peaked in 1978. Carter's flow of weapons to Indonesia increased when Congress imposed human rights restrictions. By then there was a human rights movement in Congress to block the flow of advanced weaponry to Indonesia. Carter arranged through Mondale, vice president, to get Israel to send U.S. Skyhawks to Indonesia to enable Indonesia to complete what turned out to be near genocide, killing maybe a quarter of the population or something. In the Middle East, Carter just won the Nobel Prize. His great achievement was the Camp David agreements. The Camp David agreements are presented as a diplomatic triumph for the United States. In fact, they were a diplomatic catastrophe. At Camp David, the United States and Israel accepted, finally, Egypt's 1971 offer, which they had then, U.S. had rejected at the time, except that now it was worse from the U.S.-Israeli point of view because it included the Palestinians. In order to get Israel to accept Egypt's 1971 offer, after a major war and atrocities and so on, Carter raised aid, military and other aid to Israel, to more than 50% of total aid worldwide. Israel used it at once in exactly the way they said they were going to do, as every sane person knew, as an opportunity to attack their northern neighbor, first in 1978, then in 1982, and to increase integration of the occupied territories. And that's for starters. We can continue.
Reagan?
I don't think we have to talk about that one either. I mean, Reagan is the first president to have been condemned by the International Court of Justice for what they called the unlawful use of force, meaning international terrorism, in the war against Nicaragua. Again, that's just for starters. They also, the Security Council endorsed it in 2 resolutions, both of which were vetoed by the United States.
Bush won.
Well,
So I've mentioned it before. I believe it was in one of my rants. Um, but it's actually something that's been commonly said because I didn't make it up. I can't take credit for making it. But I heard it, and it rings kind of funny in a sad and true way. Um, Let me know in the comments if you know why Dick Cheney was the only one who believed that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. In a few days, I'll pin the comment if if you guys haven't guessed it yet. But yeah, that was it's the going joke, but like I said, it's funny, but in a sad and tragic way. A lot of people died after that.
We can begin with the invasion of Panama. The invasion of Panama, which, according to the Panamanians, killed about 3,000 people, since it's never investigated. We don't know if that's true or not. This was done in order to kidnap a disobedient thug who had been supported by the United States right through his worst atrocities. Noriega, who was brought to Florida and tried for crimes that he committed mostly on the CIA payroll. Okay, that's aggression. You could go into the details of the war in Iraq, but there were plainly opportunities for, they might not have worked, we don't know, but there were opportunities for diplomatic settlement, which the Bush administration refused to consider, and incidentally the press would not report, with a single exception, and Long Island Newsday, which did report the whole story throughout accurately, and is the only newspaper in the country to have done so. The Bush administration then did attack, and the attack was carried out in a manner which is criminal under the laws of war. They attacked infrastructure. I mean, if you attack New York City and you destroy the electrical system, the power system, the sewage systems, and so on, that amounts to biological warfare, and that's the nature of the attack. Then came a sanctions regime, which it's mostly Clinton, but began with Bush, which is, by conservative estimates, killed hundreds of thousands of people while strengthening Saddam Hussein.
So I'm surprised he didn't bring it up. But Bush didn't have popular support at first for Iraq. So they ended up having, I want to say it was the daughter of a Kuwaiti ambassador. They gave her a script to read. You can look it up. It's look up babies in incubators, Iraq. And you will see a girl giving a testimony to Congress that they publicized for the people to see. Heart-wrenching testimony. Problem was it was scripted and untrue. Because she, where she claimed this was happening, like I said, she was the daughter of an ambassador from Kuwait who was here in America already. So she wasn't out over there to see Saddam Hussein's soldiers taking babies out of incubators and tossing them on the ground to die. But it worked. Bush got the support of the people to make that invasion. And, well, as he said, crimes were committed.
That takes us off to Clinton, which, that's the beginning, but that's by no means the end. We can run through it. Well, we can run through that one case suffices.
All right.
But there are plenty of others.
Bush too?
Let's go on with Clinton.
Okay.
And one of Clinton's minor escapades, very minor, was sending a couple of cruise missiles to the Sudan to destroy what they knew to be a pharmaceutical plant. There was no intelligence failure. According to the only estimates we have from the German ambassador and the regional director of Near East Foundation, who does field work in Sudan, both of them estimate several tens of thousands of deaths from one cruise missile attack. It's pretty serious. If somebody did that to us, we'd regard it as bad news. And again, we can continue. In the Middle East, for example, Clinton began by declaring.
So that one's bugging me. A pharmaceutical company Who you think put in the request for that to get hit? Because I'm sure they didn't rebuild their that's their own. I'm sure rebuilding didn't really happen, which meant competition or potential competition was eliminated. I always say it. America is a corporation with an army behind it.
Past UN resolutions, in the words of his administration, obsolete and anachronistic. Okay, so we're finished with that. No more international law. Then comes a period called the peace process, except that during the peace process, Israeli settlement, which means settlement paid for by the U.S. taxpayer and supported by U.S. military aid and diplomacy, continually increased. The most extreme year was Clinton's last year, the highest level of settlement, the highest since 1992. Meanwhile, the territories were cantonized, broken up into small regions with infrastructure projects and new settlement. I don't know what you call that, but it's under military occupation. And if anyone else was doing it, we'd call it a war crime. And again, we can continue. I wish to, I don't think we have to discuss.
Oh, fuck. That was funny but tragically sad at the same time. How old is this video? This has to be old. Oh, from 2003. So allow me to continue. Obama. And where do I need to begin? The coup in Honduras. What was it? Almost over 100,000 bombs dropped over 8 years in 9 countries. The war in Syria, which, well, as we all know now, there is still no evidence that Assad has ever once gassed his people. The one OPCW report that was put out by people who weren't on the ground, because the people who were on the ground, the report they wrote didn't quite match the narrative that our government needed to justify the 100-something missiles Trump sent. So that was his, that was one of his war crimes. But essentially, it was started with a lie back in 2013, I believe. Let's not forget Libya, where we backed the coup there. Hillary's famous quote, "We came, we saw, he died." Words of a psychopath. Again, like I said, we're ruled by him. That was a brutal death, which led to open-air slave markets of African migrants. Go figure, right? Let's see. There was action in Lebanon, drone striking Somalia, Pakistan. I want to say it was Obama. I can't remember if it was Obama or Bush that sent a drone strike to try and take out the president in Venezuela. I want to say it was Obama. Oh yeah, the coup in Ukraine. Yeah, he has a lot of them. And then, Trump, he continued them. Didn't start no new wars. We can give him credit for that. First president in a few presidencies to not start any new wars. But he didn't end them. He surrounded himself with Mike Pompeo and John Bolton and a few other Bush and Reagan era swamp creatures. Now, was he probably pressured into doing that because our presidents really don't have a fucking say? Possibly. I don't know. But either way, he still did it. And that's why I could never, couldn't support him. But yeah. And then Chomsky was also talking about the settlements in Israel. Do I think the people of Israel have a right to exist? Absolutely. Do I believe they have a right to militarily occupy and expand their territory at the expense of the Palestinians? Absolutely not. Like a lot of people, and it disturbs me that a lot of Americans will sit there and just repeat the talking points of our politicians and media. Because if many Americans who, are quick to call the Palestinians terrorists, if you broke it down to them, and how they are actually living, the conditions that they are living under as a direct result of, the occupation by Israel, no American citizen would live under those, would say, yeah, I live under those guidelines, in an open air prison, or have to go through 5 checkpoints to go 2 miles down the road to my job, gotta leave 3 hours early just in case a checkpoint is closed or the line is backed up. All the crazy shit they go through. No American would go through that. They'd revolt. And then people in other countries would be calling them terrorists. So, really need to, if that is the opinion you have, you are entitled to your opinion. But you really need to look into the conditions in which they are living and ask yourself, would you accept that for you and your family? Or would you be throwing rocks? Or if you were in Gaza, would you be throwing rockets? Because that's the only time, the world pays attention, is when rockets are thrown. Even recently, the recent spat there was. The Sheikh Jarrah protests, those been going on for 5-6 months. It's been brutal. But until Israel raided Al-Aqsa Mosque and Hamas responded by lobbing some rockets, no one in the world knew. And then all of a sudden, because some parts of the TV world and Twitter world, it was getting a lot of attention. So you had some people start to jump up and all of a sudden notice and throw their support, and then you had others who threw shade, but that's another thing. That's a whole nother topic. I'll probably, people jumping on command. That's another topic I'll go into. I'll probably do a rant on that soon. But, yeah, that was my reaction / opinion rant for Noam Chomsky, the crimes of the U.S. presidents. If you like my reaction, go ahead and hit like. Don't forget to subscribe. If you didn't like it, go ahead and hit the dislike. Tell me why you ain't like it. If you disagree with anything I said, drop a comment and let me know what your opinion is. I'd prefer people, keep it civil in the comments. Everyone can have their opinion, have their discussion. But when you run out of talking points, don't start slinging shit. It's not a good look. Other than that, link to the original video will be in the description, as well links to my political and my 420 merch. Thanks for watching. Have a nice night. Stay blazing.